during your career, all of us, work with a variety of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you've worked with a variety of teams. Sometimes there are people on your team. Sometimes it's your boss.
Yep.
Sometimes it's collaborators who are in other departments, other units of the organization that you have to work with to get something done, for the good of the order.
Yeah.
And it's the rare person who's had your degree of experience that, this is one of the most frequent questions I get from an alum's call is, Dan, I'm having trouble dealing with either a challenging boss or a difficult colleague who isn't on my team. They're not someone who reports to me.
Yeah.
There's kind of an equal. And we get this in two flavors, Adeela, the difficult boss and the difficult colleague, but not somebody I can say, hey, chop, chop, you got to get your act together. Yeah. I just have to work with them as a peer.
Yeah.
Can you share an experience like that, if you've run into that, either boss or a peer, where it's been difficult, and how did you work through it?
Yeah. I had a boss one time who I think and there was several of his team, coincidentally, was made up of 3 very high-performing, assertive women, which, poor him, because I'm sure that was a handful in itself. But he, I think, struggled with that personality type, struggled to lead, struggled to understand how to communicate with and for, and there was always a rub on the team. And it kind of set a very challenging team morale that trickled down to everybody else on the team.
So it was, to be really clear, he had trouble communicating and working with strong women.
Yeah. And I was one of them on his team that reported into him.
Right.
And, at first he was new to our team. So part of, it's always a challenge when a leader joins an organization or joins a team that's already really established in a really well-oiled machine. And then they kind of want to change things around. And you have 3 very vocal, assertive women who are like, whoa, hold on, what are you doing? And so there was this almost immediate rub that turned into kind of this microaggression, right? In ways of, in meetings, a dismissing of opinion, both ways. We did it equally as much, I'm sure, as he did. It was not a healthy working environment. Let's just say that. And, we would often speak to each other, be like, okay, how do we get through this? Or how do we give him this feedback? And I think we all tried on various ways, but it was never always one thing. It was just the personalities didn't gel. And because of that, we couldn't move forward. We just couldn't move forward. And because we couldn't move forward, we couldn't get the team to get on board, and everything just suddenly started to feel like it was not working well. And I remember at the time I had a mentor who was a prior boss of mine, and I spoke to her about it, and she had worked with this individual previously. So she kind of knew the personality of the person I was speaking to. And she said to me, and it's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received, that find the 1 or 2 good things he does. What are those 1 or 2 things that he does well, better than most? And what are the 1 or 2 things you could learn from him, and forget the rest? And I remember being like, what? I don't even think there's 1 or 2 things he does well, and it just, it takes a minute. And so then I was like, okay, I'm just going to observe. And I would observe him in meetings, and I would observe him in, different settings. And I was like, okay, he is a really good schmoozer. Not in a bad way, but can
really good, I'm sorry,
schmoozer. He can talk to people really well and get things out of people by just speaking to them. Vendors would always be willing to bend over backwards for him. And I could never understand why. So I was like, okay, he does that really well. I could probably learn from that, and
the art of schmoozing,
the art of just talk, chit chat,
right.
And it wasn't something that I particularly cared to do very much. And so it was something that I was like, okay, he actually does do that really well. And there is value in that. And here's why there's value in that. And there was a couple of different things like that. And I remember it kind of over time that my perception of him shifted, because I was able to harp on the things and think more of the things that he did well, those 1 or 2 things he did well, the 1 or 2 things I could learn from him. And that's where I focused. And we never got along. We never were chummy. And I was okay with that, because to me, the end goal was like, we need to have a productive working relationship. We need to be able to like work together to get to an end goal. And the team needs to at least feel like we can work together effectively. And, we had a very honest conversation one day. And this is the second thing I'd say. So one is like recognizing the one or two things they might be able to add value. And second is
your focus on those one or two things sort of kept at least you stationary and stable with him and at least be able to see him in a more positive way.
Yeah, because otherwise he would speak. He would speak and I was just, here he goes. And and that I think unfortunately is what happens when you end up working with a peer or a colleague or a boss that you've now tuned off, and you no longer, nothing they say is valuable, nothing they do is right. And that's a fault of our own, right? And that's not the case. There's always something that you could learn from or something that somebody can add value. So I think is just challenging yourself to see that. And maybe not worrying so much about like getting along and being friends. Right. And like that might not happen with every single person.
Do what you have to do to get the job done.
I'm
sorry, I interrupted. No. You were going to say something else.
No, that's it, is that you're not going to have this perfect relationship with every single boss. And maybe you won't get out of it a mentor, which I've luckily had many, many times, but maybe you won't get that out of it. But being able to work through an adverse relationship and come out on the other side of it is actually a pretty remarkable learning experience on its own. And I've learned a lot about how to navigate that now, having had that happen a couple times. So I think one is just like being able to see the good. And I think the other, and this is probably not just true of a boss, but assuming the best intent. And that is a mindset shift, I think. Because again, once you kind of have an ill perception of somebody, it's very difficult to assume positive intent. And you just assume that they're always there to make your life difficult or make somebody else's life difficult or, whatever it might be. And I think in many ways, when you're in a toxic situation like that, you feed into it and you get yourself in a much worse place than the situation even calls for. It was important for me in that way. I luckily have not had many experiences like that where I've had really challenging bosses. In most cases, I've had amazing leaders, but it's very difficult to work with somebody or for somebody that you don't relate to, and I think it's recognizing, just like friendships, that people play different roles in your life and you don't always need every box checked. Sometimes it's about getting through this hurdle and then there will be another one, inevitably on the other side.
This is really great counsel, I think, to all of our viewers, is that, what I'm taking away here, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier, is this is a new person coming into an up and running team. And that's the way a lot of us are going to be throughout our lives. You don't just airdrop in and the train starts now. You're getting on moving trains and off of moving trains. And, many of us have heard this. I may get this off just a little bit. The issue with groups, right, is forming, norming, storming, or actually forming, storming, norming, and then performing. And I know that sounds kind of hackneyed, but you cannot avoid it.
No.
I've worked, and I'm sure you have too, on really high performing teams, and you sort of forget that you had to get through those first couple of phases and just accept it. You have to get through and find a way. And in your way, it was to find the good in this person in some way to at least get to the point of being able to perform. Yeah. You don't have to love each other, but can we get the work done? So that's one of the key things I take away from this. And the other is and I can't tell you how important this is in my mind anyway, in the bosses that I've had to deal with. Do not assume intent. Yeah. Try to, it's hard to do, but try to keep.
Oh, it's impossible sometimes,
Yeah, it's poisonous sometimes. If you just assume good intent, that everybody wants to do the same thing. The fact is, very few people wake up in the morning, eat their Cheerios, and say, "I'm going to try to screw up this organization
or this person's life."
I'm going to go into work and I'm going to try to make Adelia's life miserable today. That's my number one goal. And then, so these are two good takeaways. So
Yeah.
so thank you for those. It's
Yeah.
really great.